Okay, this is about where we left off. So I talked a little bit about statistics, and when we do stats, what we do is we go out and collect a sample, or we do an experiment. Let's say vitamin C, you get it or you don't. So on the left, on the horizontal axis, 0 milligrams. On the right, 1,000 milligrams per day. And then the number of subjects who get colds after we shoot cold virus into their snooze. And it looks like 90% got colds who didn't have vitamin C, and only 10% with 1,000 milligrams. And by the way, that's not true. Vitamin C doesn't do anything for colds. What does lack of vitamin C cause? Remember? I said it caused a disease, not having vitamin C. Sailor got it. Huh?
Weakens your immune system.
It was a specific disease. Scurvy. So that's the way to get a lot of vitamin C is to eat citrus and fruits and all that. So when they were on long journeys, they didn't, and they got scurvy, and it's a terrible disease. Okay. Now, the question is, we want to know if this is significant. And we really can't tell. Oops. Okay. Okay. So right here and right here, that's the average in terms of percent. Keep that thing. Okay, now, same thing here. From this you could say, it looks like, well, there doesn't seem much of a difference. But again, let's say we have 10 and 1,000, okay? And the okay, there we go. And in fact, you could still find a significant difference. Like if there's a 60% chance that you'll get it versus a 50% chance, there shows that there's at least some effect, but you'll have to do a very large sample. You could get it down to, let's say, 1% difference, but it's trivial, right? It doesn't really tell you, I mean, it won't help you much. So this is kind of how we have these programs and mathematical formulas for figuring out differences between two groups. So this is kind of going over what we did. A really well-controlled experiment means that you're testing one variable, and that variable makes a prediction, or that variable is a prediction for your hypothesis, and it's falsifiable. It means you can prove it wrong. So like with a vitamin C, it's actually, you would see there's no effect. And then we minimize bias. What kind of bias is there? Do you remember from last time? Yeah.
Subject, involuntary bias, and experimenter intention.
Right, exactly. So there's subject bias. In other words, someone knows they got, let's say, the treatment or not. Or we saw those ants, and certainly the ants knew with their little tiny brains that if they got their legs chopped off, that they got a certain treatment and someone got something else, right? So that might be the placebo effect. So it's better if the subject doesn't know. And then the same thing goes for, let's say, confirmation bias with the researcher. If they know what they want to prove, because they think they're brilliant, then they might inadvertently enter in some confounding variables that give them the answer they're actually seeking. They may not do it consciously. That's why we try to falsify. And of course, the best researchers, what they try to do is they try to blow up their hypothesis. I mean, if you really want to know what's going on, that's what you do. You want to show that you're wrong. Because if you're not wrong, if it keeps coming up dollar bills, then over time you can probably say, well, this hypothesis, it looks like it's right. This cancer drug, immunotherapy actually saves people. They live an extra 2 years with it, and those who don't get it die 2 years earlier. And then we do a statistical analysis to determine if there's actually a difference between groups. People who, let's say, get the immunotherapy and those who didn't. Now, it'd be nice if we could do all science in a lab. Actually, it would not be nice. I would go stir crazy. I'm a field ecologist, and so I like doing experiments out in the field. But you can't always do a well-controlled experiment with just one variable that you're looking at, and it's perfectly designed so there's no bias. And then, of course, you want to do the right stats. Of course, you have to have a hypothesis that's rigorous enough, specific, and make specific predictions to actually show it's possible to be wrong. But there are cases where you just can't do that. For example, in the experiment testing the effect of alcohol on consumption on driving, and drinking and driving, right? Those in the treatment group drank 2 ounces of 80 proof bourbon, and those in the control group drank 2 ounces of water colored to look like bourbon. So which is a placebo? No, there is no placebo. If you took a drink of water versus a shot of bourbon, do you think you know the difference?
Yes.
Okay. So, in this case, the subjects know. Now, I guess it would be better we might be able to set it up so that it tastes like bourbon, but it's non-alcoholic. I don't know if we could do that or not. But anyway, sometimes there's cases where you just can't do a thing where the subjects don't know which group they're in. And so there's a placebo effect. The reason we do it so that the subjects don't know is so that it's blind, and we can actually, both groups will not know whether they got the treatment or not. Sometimes we really can't run an experiment. We instead just go out and collect data, and we want to know, is the United States have more obesity compared to other countries? We do a quick survey, or we get records, and we find out yes. But then, if we actually want to find out why, we would have to do an experiment. But you can't always do experiments. Sometimes they're unethical. The drinking thing is okay. Just remember, the only time you should drink and drive is if you're in no condition to walk. Okay? So that's just so you know, partying and all that, if you can't walk, then you can drive. Okay? You won't get as hurt. Okay, but anyway, there's also historical studies where we actually can't go back in time and do an experiment. Like the theory of plate tectonics, which shows that the continents actually move all over the globe over millions and billions of years because they're on this big place. Now, we've gone out and collected data, but we didn't actually do the experiments to show it. So we found fossils over on the west coast of Africa in a certain layer at a certain age level, and we found those same fossils in South America on the east coast. They fit together very nicely, and in fact, at one time they were part of one larger continent. Okay, so that's some evidence, but we didn't actually do the experiment where we replicated the Earth 1,000 times and then saw what happens when you have a molten core and all that, and actually run the experiment. Okay. So it's not like if we can't do a lab experiment, then we can't do science. It's not the case at all. It's just that you can make stronger conclusions if you can actually do that. But sometimes you can't, but you can still make pretty strong conclusions. So a theory is a comprehensive explanation for a broad set of observations or phenomenon that is supported by a vast body of evidence that has been extensively tested and has not yet been proven wrong. Now, therefore, theories are provisional. If new information comes in, new evidence that does not uphold the predictions of that theory, then that's when you discard the theory. Now, a hypothesis is a bit different. So I want to get into exactly what a hypothesis is, and we'll go on to the next slide. So hypotheses are a dime a dozen. If you remember watching the video of Feynman, Richard Feynman, who's a Nobel laureate, he's a physicist. Basically, he said, where do you start out? Well, you come out with an explanation, and it can be a guess, he even said, essentially. And those guesses, though, they have to be fairly specific, and they have to make very specific predictions. Okay? A theory, though, of course, is oftentimes composed of a bunch of different hypotheses or a number of predictions, and it has been upheld continuously. So we could probably say, like, the theory of evolution, it's almost bordering on a fact at this point. I guess you could say that, just like Einstein's theory of relativity or plate tectonics. Now, just a theory is a different animal altogether. It's kind of common usage that most people who don't understand science and what a scientific theory actually is. So, just a theory, or it's only a theory, is misleading, and it actually kind of mixes up two different meanings. Just a theory is a careless, imprecise hunch. It's kind of like a conjecture. There's no supportive evidence, more like a belief, or a scientific theory is a completely different animal. As I mentioned, the theory is a powerful explanation for a broad set of observations. Okay, doesn't matter, I got it on tape. Okay, so a theory, though, is not only something that's been extensively tested and not proven wrong at this point, but it actually explains the larger phenomenon. So here we have like the germ theory of disease, theory of evolution, theory of gas laws and things like that, Einstein's theory of gravity, all that. Okay? So a theory, though, is not, oh, it's only a theory. That's not a theory. That's a layperson's explanation. It's basically like an opinion, like Donald Trump, when he says something and there's no support for it whatsoever. So, scientific theories and the scientific hypotheses are very, very specific in what they test and how they test it. And the germ theory of disease has lots of different kinds of hypotheses about, let's say, transmission of infectious diseases. What kinds of pathogens are more likely to be transmitted than another? Okay. Now, okay. Anybody in here, would you believe them? Anybody?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'll give you his phone number. Do you think he's cute?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's why I want to kill him. I mean, I do. Just so you know, if you think you're going to actually, like, he's not marriage material, but he might give you high-quality offspring. Specifically, if he produces a lot of males like himself, they will then in turn leave lots of offspring. And if he produces daughters that like that kind of thing, then that will spread. But in the meantime, there's something working against them, and that's people want to just kill them. Okay? Now, some people in here don't. Some people, are really handsome or gorgeous, and they think, oh, yeah, sure, he's okay. But a lot of people just want to kill him. Okay. Oh, it says it stands up to all rounds of testing. So, in other words, go at it. Test him. Okay. Now, a scientific law is different than a theory. A law is more like an observation. So, a law of planetary motion, that was a guy named Kepler who proposed it after Copernicus, and he showed that how planets moved around the sun, orbited the sun. And they did it in an elliptical fashion instead of a circular fashion. Now, it doesn't tell you why the planets move in that way. It just says this is how they move. A theory is different in that it takes that observation and then it tests a hypothesis or a bunch of hypotheses and makes an overall explanation for, let's say, why we see planets move around the sun the way they do. And the first explanation that really stood up was Newton's theory of gravity. And it lasted for 300 years until Einstein came along. Okay? So that's the difference. Now, it would be nice if, when doing experiments, we could just take people and, like with bourbon thing, there'd be no, forget about ethics. You get these people, some group gets bourbon, some doesn't. You tell them to go drive off into the sunset, but we can't do that. Also, sometimes it might be better to scientifically explore something with an organism that's simpler. So this is E. coli. It's a bacteria. It's a kind of workforce. It's been used in tons and tons and tons, thousands and millions of experiments. All these organisms, they've been sequenced in terms of their genome. Then you can actually, let's say, select for certain traits that you want in the organism. So let's say with E. coli, you want to know how temperature affects growth. Well, you can do experiments with that and with different kinds of E. coli. Or with a mouse. Sometimes we use that little mouse to look at some physiology that we can't do in people right away. But we want to, let's say, explore some disease. Well, you can actually genetically engineer a mouse to produce that sort of disease that's just like the disease that is in humans. And then that way you can more easily explore it. Not for the mouse, but for us. Okay? So there's tons and tons of different lines or strains of mice and rats. And you can actually order any kind that you want at a clearinghouse because there's scientific companies that actually breed them. Same thing with fruit flies. Some of the earliest genetics work that actually demonstrated the mechanism behind evolution by natural selection was done with fruit flies, and they're still used. This is a worm that a number of people at this university use to learn about certain things about actually sleep. So, now, anybody know what the difference is between a primary and a secondary source? Huh? What do you think? Primary?
A primary would be something that you observed yourself, or maybe an interview or an experiment conducted, and a secondary would be like a case study that you examined or something from somebody else's journal.
You said it right at a certain point. It's an experiment. It's a study and experiment that you do that you then publish. Okay, a case study could be an experiment too. Okay, a secondary source is someone else writing about scientific findings, whether it's in the newspaper or a magazine or on the internet, whatever. This is an experimental study on what might cause these worms. They go to sleep like we do, and they want to know why. they go to sleep, and what's the mechanism that makes them fall asleep, and signaling mechanism. And epidermal outer layer growth factor, it's a hormone, and it signals a change in behavior. Quiescence means like calm, means sleep. So they think that maybe this epidermal growth factor is responsible for why the worm goes to sleep and why humans go to sleep. Because it turns out a lot of these very fundamental things about biology are shared across all kinds of different organisms, from E. coli, bacteria, all the way up through vertebrates. Okay? Like same genetic code, exactly the same genetic code whether you're a bacteria or you're a human. All kinds of things that are conserved. Okay, so and the person who did this is at the university here. Her name is Cheryl Van Buskirk. Okay, so this was in Nature Neuroscience, a very, very, very top journal. Okay, and then secondary source about, let's say, sleep. They might even cite that study. And you might hear it in all sorts of different ways of communicating. Okay, so this is a philosophical question. How does science proceed? Now, there's a saying about standing on the shoulders of giants. In other words, we don't go back to square one. We've gained a certain amount of knowledge, and then we're actually standing on all the scientists before us, who came before us, and we learned all these different things. It's kind of a continuous model, incremental model, in terms of learning new things about the universe that we're in. Now, there's also, though, scientists are actually fairly conservative. First of all, they want to see the evidence. And also, if someone comes up with a really crazy idea, they tend to resist it. Like the guy, his name was Wegener, who came up with a theory of plate tectonics about the continents moving all over the place. He suggested that that's what was going on. Well, you can imagine, continents don't look like they move, right? They're heavy. Actually, they're light compared to the underlying matter. But it took 50 years. Now, he can suggest a mechanism, but it took 50 years before he was right. The continents do move, and they have moved, and they're still moving. Things don't move on Mars, just so you know. Of course, there's no seas anymore, but there used to be. But they used to move, but they don't anymore because the core has solidified on Mars, and our core hasn't. Okay, so sometimes there's paradigm shifts. So that was one example of coming up with a whole new way of thinking, completely outside the box. They laughed at him, and then he was right. A lot of times they laugh at you because you're wrong. But still, that's usually how we find out really big things. Someone thinks completely outside of the box. Einstein is another example. The germ theory of disease. But there's a reason for that. Sometimes you can't observe things. And until you can, you really can't know what's going on or propose any sort of explanation for it. So, like the germ theory of disease. What piece of technology do you think affected our understanding of infectious disease? Huh? Yeah, microscope. So before there was a microscope, there was, I mean, the best eye, you can maybe see a tenth of a millimeter or something like that. But you can't see anything more than that. And bacteria are, let's say, a couple of hundred nanometers. Viruses, only less than that. We couldn't even see cells, like large cells. Well, we could see like an egg as a cell, but in general, we can't see cells either. And it wasn't until someone actually developed a microscope, and that was good enough, and they started thinking, well, this whole business about, they had this theory about disease that was from the Romans, about 4 different humors, blood, 2 kinds of bile, and something else. And you got sick because they got out of whack, and that's why you went to a barber, and he was a surgeon, and he believed you, and that would supposedly put your humors back in order. It often killed you, as you can imagine, or certainly made you weak. But anyway, same thing with telescopes. Changed everything. In fact, today, Hubble Space Telescope has completely transformed our understanding of the universe. Completely. Because not only does it measure visible light, but all kinds of different wavelengths. And so, a lot of times, we can't, scientific knowledge really changes mainly because we can suddenly see something that wasn't there before, or we couldn't see. So you can make up explanations all throughout, like crazy explanations, but you're really not doing them on any observation, right? So certainly technology has a huge effect on scientific progress. Okay. So what's a correlation? Someone can observe it. So what does it mean as a relationship between 2 groups? What do you think? What's a correlation? Condition A happens in the same way as condition B. So think of something. How about temperature and the clothes you wear? Okay? There's a correlation there, usually. When it's warm out, you wear far less clothes. Now, when it's colder, more clothes. Now, the thing is, you really can't say anything about cause and effect there. Okay? In fact, there is cause and effect between the clothes you wear and usually in the temperature outside, the weather. But a lot of times there's not. So, okay. That's height and weight. And we'll say, here's 5, 6, 7 feet, 8 feet, not very many of those. And we would probably see something like this. And we would see a relationship. It's not perfect, There are some people that are really tall, that are really skinny. There's some people that are really small and they're big boned, right? So height doesn't cause weight. Weight doesn't cause height. They're both measures of body size, actually. You could actually do a statistical technique where you combine them into some kind of single variable. Okay. So a lot of times correlations don't really mean much. In that case, they certainly don't. But sometimes you can even say, oh, it seems like there's a correlation, but is there? Or is that just foolishness? So you can't prove cause and effect. So here's a good one. Back in the 80s, rap music was created. Oh, and the rappers were different. They did it without a net. By that I mean they didn't write raps out. They just did it right off the top of their head. It's magnificent. But here's one. The popularization of rap music in the late 1980s coincided with a sharp rise in narcotics use and violent crime. Okay. Now, if we turn that into a hypothesis, if you listen to rap music, you will do narcotics and violent crime, and I can attest to the fact that it's true. Okay? It's true. Yeah. Because I listened to rap music and I started doing narcotics and violent crime. It was amazing. I couldn't control myself. I listened to rap music, and I'm out there shooting smack and smacking people. Okay? So I stopped listening to rap music, and it would stop, just like that. Okay. But tell me something. Remember, there was a spike in crime and narcotics use in the 80s, and that in fact increased drug use and violent crime actually was the instigator for rap music. We just switched around cause and effect, didn't we? Completely switched it around. So now it's actually likely, but not very likely. You know, there's always been this thing about the television you watch. If you watch violent movies or if you play Grand Theft Auto violent games, that you watch that and then you go out and you do violent things, and you know, it inspires you. And it does. I mean, I see rape and I just want to, right? Terrible. Just terrible. No control. No self-control. Okay, so we have to realize, now there isn't much of an actual coincidence there. But in this case, you can see how you can get confused about what's really going on. Maybe they both affected each other. It's pretty easy to understand. Now, then you can also have something where it looks like there's actually cause and effect. But you would say, this is crazy. People, and this is true, this is actually true data. People who regularly wear seatbelts are more likely to be diagnosed with cancer than those without seatbelts. Why? Because seatbelts cause cancer.
Because the people who wear seatbelts are more likely to live longer and have time to contract cancer?
Yeah. If you don't want to get cancer, don't wear seatbelts. You won't live very long. The chances of getting cancer go up the older you get, just by chance alone, but also because actually there's a higher incidence of cancer as you get older because your immune system doesn't work as well. Okay? So, like I said, you don't even have to forget about the seatbelt. Just take a gun and shoot yourself and you won't get cancer. Okay? So, sometimes when you see an association like that, you can say, well, that's crazy. Why do we see that? We find out that it's some other thing that's actually causing, or it's a byproduct of some other thing. Also, we talked about, the 95% confidence interval about when something is significant. A lot of times you find spurious correlations. I could go out and start collecting numbers from meat packing plants, from soil samples and how much calcium are in it, from all kinds of things. And if I collected thousands of different samples of different kinds of things, much different kinds of things, I promise you that there would be some correlations there that have nothing to do, it's just a complete coincidence. It's called spurious correlation. So the only way first of all, there's many possible explanations. Sometimes there might be cause and effect. But to actually prove it, you actually have to do an experiment. So a lot of people, correlation is certainly a piece of evidence that maybe it's an observation, let's say about global warming and the amount of carbon that's put in the air, CO2, from burning fossil fuels. Now, we could perhaps say that that's actually the case. We could do experiments on a small scale. We can also do models. Or, let's say something else entirely. If you have a correlation, you set up an actual experiment where you control everything. You say, okay, I believe this causes this. And then you actually set it up and test it, like the vitamin C thing. So the people might have said, oh, there's a correlation between taking vitamin C and getting a cold. Personal anecdote, right? Just, a little anecdote. My aunt always takes vitamin C and never gets a cold. Well, then you have to go out and test it. And that's where everything hits the road. So, even anecdotal evidence is a start. Like my Aunt Mabel, right? But where does this fit in terms of Mabel's anecdote, observation? But that's all the kind of evidence it is. Anecdotal evidence is very, very weak data. Even though some people think, oh, see, that's getting measles vaccine causes, and all of a sudden my kid has autism. The fact that you get the vaccine and autism starts showing up at the same time in life. But that's a good example. So you have to actually go out and test it, formulate a hypothesis, and then test it. Okay.